here's where the first milestone becomes so significant. And it's not just about the number itself. Once you cross $100,000 in invested assets, the psychological experience of building wealth starts to change, because now you have enough capital that the returns themselves start to feel real. At 7% annually, $100,000 generates $7,000 a year in growth. That's nearly $600 a month from doing absolutely nothing. $600 a month from money that's just sitting there growing while you sleep. That number will keep climbing. And here's what blows most people's minds when they first see it play out. It took you almost 8 years to go from 0 to 100,000. But it only takes about 5 more years to reach 200,000. Same monthly contributions, same rate of return. But the journey to the second 100,000 is nearly 3 years shorter than the journey to the first. Now you're 13 years in and sitting at $200,000. Your total contributions over that time add up to roughly 78,000. The other 122,000, that's pure growth. Your money has been quietly, invisibly compounding in the background, earning returns on returns, and now those gains are becoming numbers you can actually feel. But here's the part that really matters. Even at 200,000, you're actually much closer to 1 million than the math on the surface suggests. Because compound interest is exponential, not linear. Each dollar of growth generates its own future growth, which generates its own future growth after that. The snowball is now rolling, and it's picking up speed in ways that are genuinely hard to believe till you're watching it happen in your own account. By year 18, you've reached $400,000. Your total contributions are around $108,000. The other $290,000 came from growth. At this point, your investments are generating roughly $28,000 a year in returns. Think about that for a second. You're earning more than $2,000 a month from compound growth alone, without clocking in a single extra hour of work. And that brings us to the second milestone, the one that quietly changes everything about your daily life. Around $650,000 in invested assets, something shifts that goes far beyond the numbers on a screen. Consider this. The median household income in the United States sits around $78,000 a year. That's what the average family brings in by trading time for money. Commutes, meetings, office politics, demanding schedules, and everything else that comes with showing up for someone else's agenda 5 days a week. Now here's the comparison that stops most people cold. With $650,000 invested at an 8% return, you're generating roughly $52,000 a year in passive income. Not quite the median household income, but more than enough to fundamentally reshape your financial reality. And if you target full income replacement at that level, you'd need closer to $975,000 to generate $78,000 annually at that same return rate. But here's what actually matters about crossing into that 650 territory. It's not that you can quit your job tomorrow. It's that for the first time the option exists. And having an option you've never had before changes how you move through the world in ways that are hard to fully explain until you experience them. Suddenly losing a job is an inconvenience instead of a catastrophe. A medical emergency is stressful, but it doesn't wipe out everything you've built. You can negotiate at work from a position of genuine confidence because your survival isn't on the line. You can take a risk on a business idea, a career change, or a skill you've always wanted to develop because you have a cushion underneath you that most people simply don't have. There's something in psychology called the scarcity mindset. When people feel financially desperate, their mental bandwidth gets consumed by financial stress. They make worse decisions. They take worse deals. They stay in situations they should leave because they can't afford the uncertainty of leaving. But once you have enough assets generating real income, that mental bandwidth opens back up. You start thinking more clearly. You start making decisions based on what you actually want instead of what you can barely afford. This is what people mean when they talk about money buying freedom. Not freedom to buy things, freedom to think differently, freedom to choose. And then there's the third milestone, the one that carries the most weight, not just mathematically, but psychologically. $1 million. At $500 a month, 7% returns, and enough patience to stay consistent, you cross that threshold around year 29 of your investment journey. And the moment it happens, something shifts inside you that's almost impossible to explain to someone who hasn't been there. It doesn't feel like the movies. You won't feel like a different person. You probably won't feel rich in the flashy, showy sense of the word. In fact, with inflation doing what inflation does over decades, $1 million today represents a very different kind of wealth than it would have a generation ago. But what you will feel is something quieter and more powerful than any of that. You'll feel validated. You'll feel the weight of every small sacrifice, every passed-up purchase, every automated transfer, every month of staying consistent when it felt pointless, turn into something real and tangible. You'll realize that building wealth was never actually reserved for trust fund babies or people who got lucky on crypto or tech stocks. It was available to you the whole time. You just had to be willing to play a very long game in a world that rewards short-term thinking. And then the math does something almost absurd. From $1 million, you only need 50% growth to reach $1.5 million. That can happen in just a few good market years. To reach $2 million, your investments simply need to double, which historically happens roughly every 7 to 10 years. The jump from $2 million to $3 million requires another 50%. From $3 to $4 million, only 33%. Each additional million arrives faster and more easily than the one before it. This is the part of the wealth-building journey where the flywheel we talked about, that heavy wheel that seemed impossible to move at the beginning, is now spinning almost entirely on its own momentum. Your contributions matter less. More consistent behavior matters more. And time, which felt like your enemy in the early years, has become your greatest asset. At $1 million generating 7% annually, you're looking at $70,000 a year in investment returns. That's before Social Security, before any other income sources. Just from the portfolio you built, $500 at a time, month after month, year after year. Now, none of this means the path is perfectly smooth. Markets crash. Life gets expensive. Emergencies happen. And yes, there will be years where your account drops and everything in you wants to panic and pull out. But here's the thing about market downturns that changes once you understand the math. When prices fall and you keep contributing, your monthly investment buys more shares at lower prices. When the market recovers, and historically it always has, those extra shares you picked up during the dip become enormously valuable. Volatility isn't just a risk to manage. For the long-term investor, it's actually a tool. So here's where we land. 3 milestones. 3 moments where everything accelerates and shifts. $100,000. Where compound interest stops being a concept and starts being a force you can actually feel working in your account. $650,000. Where your money begins generating enough passive income to change the texture of your daily life, your decisions, and your sense of what's possible. And $1 million, where you realize with a quiet and unshakable certainty that you've figured out something most people never do. The math behind all of this isn't complicated. It isn't reserved for financial experts or people born into the right families. It's available to anyone willing to start, stay consistent, and resist the pull of a world that wants you to spend everything you earn as fast as you earn it. 29 years from now, you'll either look back and be grateful you started, or you'll wonder what might have happened if you had. The difference between those two outcomes is a decision you can make today. There's a moment that happens to almost everyone who's serious about building wealth. You're sitting there, staring at your investment account, watching the numbers crawl forward like you're stuck in traffic that never moves. Month after month, you contribute. Month after month, the progress feels almost insultingly slow. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet voice starts asking, is this actually going anywhere? Is any of this actually working? And then one day, without any dramatic announcement, something shifts. Your money starts making more money than you're putting in. The numbers start climbing in ways that feel almost unfair. And you realize this is what they were talking about. This is the thing nobody could quite explain until you saw it yourself. But here's what most people don't know. That shift doesn't happen gradually and evenly over time. It happens at 3 very specific points. 3 milestones where everything, and I mean everything, changes about how wealth builds, how you feel about money, and what becomes possible in your life. Today we're going to walk through all 3 of them. And by the end, you'll understand something that most people spend their entire lives never quite grasping. Let's start with a belief that almost everyone carries around without questioning it. When most people think about building wealth, they imagine it works like filling up a bathtub. You pour money in, the level rises steadily, and eventually it reaches the top. Every dollar in equals exactly $1 of progress. Save 10,000, you're 10,000 closer. Save 50,000, you're 50,000 closer. Clean, predictable, linear. It makes complete sense. It also happens to be completely wrong, because money, when you invest it properly, doesn't behave like water filling a tub. It behaves more like a snowball rolling down a mountain. At the top, it moves slowly, picks up barely anything, and you find yourself wondering if it's even worth pushing. But as it rolls further down, it gathers more snow, gets heavier, moves faster, and eventually becomes something so large and powerful that it almost seems to have a life of its own. The problem is that we live in a world built around instant results. You can get food at your door in 30 minutes. You can stream any movie ever made in seconds. You can buy almost anything with a single tap. In that kind of world, the idea of waiting years, or even decades for a financial strategy to mature sounds almost unreasonable. It goes against every instinct we've been trained to have, and that impatience is exactly what keeps most people from ever reaching the first milestone. Not lack of intelligence, not lack of income, just the inability to stay in the game long enough for the math to do what the math does. So let's talk about what the math actually does and where it does it most dramatically. Imagine you start investing $500 a month. That's around $125 a week. Not nothing, but not impossible for most working adults either. Think of it as the money that currently disappears into dining out, subscriptions, and the random purchases you don't remember making by the end of the month. Now assume your investments grow at roughly 7% annually. That's actually conservative compared to what the stock market has historically returned over long periods. At that rate, something interesting happens. It takes you about 7 years and 9 months to reach your first $100,000. 7 years and 9 months. That sounds like a long time, and honestly, in the early stages, it feels like one. During those first years, almost all the growth in your account comes directly from your own contributions. You are doing the heavy lifting. Compound interest is there, but it's warming up on the sidelines, not yet the dominant player. Of that 100,000, roughly 46,000 comes from what you put in. The remaining 54,000 is investment growth. Not bad, but not yet life-changing. And this is exactly where most people make a critical mistake. They look at those numbers after 7 or 8 years of disciplined investing, feel underwhelmed by the pace, and either slow down, stop, or start questioning whether any of it is worth it. What they don't realize is that they've just done the hardest part. They've built the foundation, and now the foundation is about to start doing something remarkable.